Welcome back, young scientists. Welcome back to cells and welcome to the jungle of cells. You'll find out more about the jungle of cells as you listen to the song, The Jungle of Cells. And so that's why I told you to welcome to the jungle. Now, you already know that cells are around and you already know a little bit about the history of cells. So today we are going to look at some of the parts and what they do. And I brought some visual aids with me today. So it may take a minute for me to grab them and things like that. But I'm going to show you some things that are compared to the different parts of the cells. So again, as you have before, if you are taking notes, you need to put the topic, that's parts and functions, the date, whatever day today is that you're watching this video, and then in the main ideas and concepts, that's where you write your notes about the parts and function of the cell. Many of these are vocabulary words, so basically you could just highlight them. Do not put the definition. You can if you want to, but you don't need to put the whole definition, but just maybe a word or a picture that will help you to remember a little bit more about that particular part of the cell. And then the bottom part is for after the video and after you've gone through the slide deck. So let us begin. The cell is the smallest unit thing that is considered alive. So if something is smaller than a cell, it's not living. And if something's bigger than a cell, we'll talk about that later, about tissues and organs and organ systems. Inside of a cell, there are things called organelles. See the 4 letters at the end, E-L-L-E? E-L-L-E means tiny. So an organelle is a tiny organ. So let's just throw this out a little bit. What about if you had a pencil L? You got it. That would be a tiny pencil. Or how about a thumb L? That would be a tiny thumb. None of those are really words, but it's fun to do that anyway. So an organelle is a tiny part inside the cell that has a particular function. And that's what we're going to be looking at. This is just a page that shows a picture of all of the organelles and tells you where they are all located in the cell. The letters up on the left-hand side with the different parts, and they are labeled inside the cell. You have a picture of this in your Songs of Life Science songbook. It has the picture and the labels, but it doesn't have the words next to it. That's one that you could use then to kind of study and practice. It's nice to be able to not have the answers right there so that you don't just look at them. You have to actually guess what they are and then look and try to see if you are correct. So without further ado, we move on to the different parts of the cell. So the first part of the cell that I'm going to talk about is the nucleus. The nucleus of the cell is the control part of the cell. It's the thing that commands and makes sure that you know what you're doing. So what I have for the control of the cell is an iPad. Okay, an iPad can control things, might even control people. Makes you look at it. You can look at your Facebook and you can look at your messages and you can play games, but it controls a lot of things. It has a calendar on it. So an iPad is like a control center, like a nucleus that is in charge. The next part is the cell wall. The cell wall is for structure and support. Now I have something that looks a little bit like a cell wall, and this is more it looks like instead of actually is. This is a windmill. And do you notice how this cell wall's got holes in it? The cell wall really isn't a solid wall. Otherwise, nothing would be able to get in or out. The cell wall is just structure and support. So this windmill is a good example of a cell wall because it's got the structure and support, but yet things can still go through. And in the cell, it's important that things go in and out. There's another part that's important for that. That is the cell membrane. Now, the cell membrane, I like to think of it as a Ziploc bag. Now, unfortunately, things can't go in and out through a Ziploc bag. But if this Ziploc bag had tiny holes in it, that would be a great example of a cell membrane because it can control what goes in and out. Sometimes people think of the cell membrane as like a door or the entrance to the bag. The opening in the bag would be another good example. Moving along to the next part, we have the vacuole. The vacuole is the part that holds things. And so I have a little container here that would be like a vacuole. It's got stuff in it, and it can be water, it can be food, It can be wastes sometimes inside the vacuole. Plants have bigger vacuoles than animals do because they need to have water in them so they can carry out photosynthesis. Moving on to the endoplasmic reticulum, sometimes known as the ER. These are the little tubes for transport. If you think of them as a straw going through, you can see the straw going through. It's not actually the stuff in it, it's just the actual tube for carrying things. So if it was in your house, it would be like the pipes or the electrical wires. They carry electricity, they carry water and things, but it's just only the tubes is the ER. So cells have tubes that help them carry things. Ribosomes are the protein factories. We have the protein factories. An important source of protein in my house is this peanut butter, Jif peanut butter in particular, creamy Jif peanut butter. So these protein factories, these are the things that make the protein, the things that make the structures that are used to build the parts of the cell, just like peanut butter gives you protein. They're tiny little things. You'll hear in the song about the tiny ribosomes in the jungle of cells. The Golgi bodies, these are the manufacturing and shipping center. I like to think of them as the post office. And so I have a letter here. So the Golgi bodies make things and then they send them off to where they need to go. The only difference between the Golgi bodies and the post office is the post office doesn't make the mail. We have to make the mail to send off to other people. But the Golgi bodies actually produce the things that go in the mail as well as sending them off to other people. So the manufacturing, the shipping, they ship out, they receive, they produce different things in the Golgi bodies. The chloroplasts. The chloroplasts are like a plant because they're the parts that carry out photosynthesis. And so I think of them as like a green plant because the green plant can make its own food. And inside of a cell, or at least inside the cell of a plant, they would have these green parts that would help them to carry out photosynthesis, just like a plant does. The mitochondria is the energy-producing thing. There's a couple things I have for the mitochondria. It could be like a battery, because batteries have energy in them. All you have to do is plug it into something, and you have your energy. It could also be like energy like this, like food energy. These are some really good fruit snacks. They can give us energy. Or it could also be like a power cord. Plug it into the wall, and then you can plug whatever you need to into it to give you the energy. They're the powerhouse. They're the things that make the energy that living things need to do what they need to do, to carry out their life processes. We come then to the lysosomes. The lysosomes are the trash cans. Got a big trash can right here. Doesn't have any trash in it right now because I didn't want to put any trash on the video. Didn't want to make it a trashy video. So here's a trash can, just like the lysosomes. The lysosomes collect the trash, and sometimes they even take the trash out. You find lysosomes more often in animal cells than plant cells, but they can sometimes also be found in plant cells. They're just not always in a plant cell. Finally, we come to the last part, the part that holds everything in place, and it's called the cytoplasm. Now, you've already seen my cytoplasm. It's Jello. Okay? Jello, it's a jelly-like substance, so you could put things in here and they would stay right in the place that you put them. And so if there's not an organelle there, there is the jelly-like stuff that holds all the organelles where they are in place so that they are safe and secure. And cytoplasm is also kind of squishy, and so if the cell can flex just a little bit and it doesn't hurt the things inside of the cell because the cytoplasm protects it. So those are all the different parts of the cell. Now, one other little thing about the cell has to do with the differences between the animal cell and the plant cell. The animal cell is one type of cell and the plant cell is another. And they have a few differences. One of the main differences is the shape. Oftentimes animal cells are ovalish, whereas plant cells are going to be squarish. Has to do with the vacuole is another thing. The plant cell, you can see, has a very large vacuole, while the animal cell has smaller vacuoles and maybe even sometimes more than one smaller vacuole. The plant cell has two other parts that the animal cell does not. It has the cell wall, which gives it structure and shape. That's why we don't have cell walls, because if you did this, if you had a cell wall, you would break your finger, because that's what the cell wall does. It gives it structure and shape. Our cells are pliable and we can move, and that's really nice for us. They also have chloroplasts, and those are the things that make their food. We don't make our food. We have to eat our food and steal it from plants and other animals that have eaten plants. The last part then that's different in the animal cell, sometimes you will find a lysosome. Not always a lysosome in animal cells, and sometimes you find lysosomes in plant cells. So that's kind of a tricky one. I would look at some of the other characteristics instead, but that is another way to tell the difference between a plant cell and an animal cell. So we've talked a little bit about the parts and functions of the cell. Now it's time for you to write yourself a little quiz about the parts of the cell. Probably 5 questions would be good on this one, because there's a lot of information that you could write about. So at least 5 questions. You might ask about the parts. You might ask about what they do. You might ask about how they compare with each other, or how they compare with other things. Like I showed you some of the things that I brought that compared to the different parts of the cell. That would be up to you. Now, just a little preview. In the cell, deep within the cell, there are many organelles. In the cell, deep within